My husband and I had an agreement. Whenever one of us came home, we had to knock 3 times on the door as a signal. One day, I forgot to knock and just opened the door and walked straight in. The scene in the living room left me paralyzed. My husband and I used to have this little game that only the two of us understood. It wasn't some grand romantic gesture, nor was it a meaningless habit. It was a secret pact established the very first day we moved in together. Back when we were younger, we believed that as long as there was enough love, happiness would endure. Every time one of us arrived at the door, the one arriving had to knock 3 times, no more, no less. 3 distinct, gentle knocks, like a heartbeat, before turning the key. My husband, Travis, called it our security code. He laughed and said that married life needed a ritual, a reminder that this is our home, the place where we are trusted. I thought it was sweet, so I played along. Gradually, those 3 knocks became a part of the apartment, like the sound of boiling water in the kitchen or the scent of his shampoo lingering on the pillows. Even when I came home late, dead on my feet, I would force myself to knock exactly 3 times. I thought I was preserving something beautiful. Little did I know that some secret pacts are born not out of sweetness, but to prevent a disaster. That afternoon, the Seattle rain was pouring down as if someone had flipped the entire sky upside down over the streets. It was a typical heavy downpour, pulling down a curtain of water so thick that the skyscrapers in the distance blurred like an old movie. The clock on my car's dashboard flashed exactly 4:13 p.m. I had just closed a multi-million-dollar consulting contract. It was the kind of deal that finally allowed my team to breathe after 3 months of walking a tightrope. The clients invited me out to celebrate. I declined. I just wanted to go home. Open the cabinet, grab the bottle of wine I'd been saving since New Year's, and watch Travis take off his glasses, rub his eyes, and smile, that specific smile he only had when listening to my work stories. I didn't call him. I wanted it to be a surprise. I even stopped by the supermarket to pick up some steaks and a bouquet of white baby's breath. The rain lashed at my slacks, freezing cold, but I felt giddy, like a kid hiding a present behind her back. Our apartment was in an older brick building in Pioneer Square, with long hallways and dim yellow lighting. I walked up to the door, hands full of bags, fumbling for my keys. In that split second, I forgot about the 3 knocks. I just wanted to get inside quickly. As the key turned, the lock gave a soft click. The door swung open. There were no lights on. No sound from the TV. No scent of the sandalwood essential oil Travis usually burned. Instead, there was a strange odor, a cold, sharp smell like surgical alcohol mixed with metallic dust and damp earth. I froze, the smile choking in my throat. I reached for the light switch but stopped. Because in the darkness, there was a pale glow, not from a lamp, but a reflection off heavy plastic. My eyes slowly adjusted. The living room was no longer a living room. The Navajo rug I had ordered from Santa Fe was rolled up and shoved into a corner, looking like a hidden corpse. The floorboards and the sofa were completely draped in thick, clear plastic tarps. The edges were meticulously sealed with heavy-duty tape, exactly how they wrap equipment in a forensic lab. The coffee table was wrapped, the TV stand was wrapped, even the legs of the dining table were covered in plastic. In the middle of the room, Travis was on his knees. He was wearing a tight black outfit that looked like a hazmat suit, disposable blue nitrile gloves, safety goggles, and a respirator mask. He was hunched over, shoulders tense, concentrating so hard I could hear his heavy breathing through the filter. In front of him, resting on a black velvet cloth on the floor, was a row of tiny, intricate tools, tweezers, steel needles, micro-bristle brushes, and a head-mounted magnifying visor things I couldn't even name. But what he was working on sent a chill down my spine. It was a dark, golden metal block, about the size of a hand, with a structure as complex as a miniaturized engine. It had microscopic gears, grooves, locking pins, and engraved lines as thin as hair. It didn't look like jewelry, nor did it look like a model. It looked very real, highly professional, and utterly alien to the ordinary life of a man who usually wore slippers to buy groceries on Sunday mornings. Travis was brushing the metal block, scraping at it with the patience of a surgeon dissecting tissue. Occasionally, he would lift it, turning it under a small, focused light source I couldn't quite see. The entire scene was so eerily silent that even the pouring rain outside seemed to be swallowed up. I stood at the threshold, my heart pounding violently, a ringing in my ears. I didn't understand what I was looking at, but I knew one thing. This was not a surprise meant for me. This was a secret. And I had opened the door and walked in without permission. For a second, my mind raced through the most cliché scenarios: affairs, gambling, drugs. But no, this didn't look like any of those mundane sins. You don't need to wrap your entire living room in plastic to cheat on your wife. You don't need safety goggles and nitrile gloves for gambling. And drugs don't involve a complex metal device with clockwork gears. I wanted to call out his name, to ask him what he was doing, but my throat felt like it was packed with stones. I suddenly remembered something Travis used to say, half-jokingly, whenever I asked too many questions about his work. Don't be too curious. Curiosity will only give you a headache. I used to laugh, thinking he was just being edgy. Now, that phrase echoed like a delayed warning. An old instinct flared up inside me, the same instinct that helped me survive brutal contract negotiations filled with legal traps and corporate sharks smiling while trying to destroy me. That instinct screamed, "Back away! Don't let him see you!" I took a step back. Then another. I pulled the door shut, moving in agonizing slow motion so the hinges wouldn't squeak. The door clicked shut, sealing the darkness behind a thin crack. I stood in the hallway, my back freezing, rainwater dripping from my hair down my neck. I gripped the grocery bag so tightly the handles cut into my skin. In my mind, the images looped like a corrupted video file. The plastic tarps, the dark golden metal block, Travis kneeling like a priest performing a dark ritual, and that unmistakable smell of alcohol and metal. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and did the only thing my 3-year habit allowed my hand to do automatically. I raised my fist toward the door. Knock. 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 3 perfectly timed beats. Not too loud, but clear enough for the person inside to hear. I could feel my own heart slamming against my ribs like a pile driver. I counted. 1, 2, 3 seconds. Inside, I heard very faint but frantic noises, the sound of someone scrambling to pick things up, the tearing of heavy tape, the rapid thud of footsteps on the floorboards. Just a few seconds later, the deadbolt turned. The door opened. Travis stood before me. No black suit, no safety goggles, no respirator mask. He was wearing his familiar gray t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair slightly messy like he had just woken from a nap. On his face was the perfect, standard smile of a loving husband. The familiar scent of sandalwood wafted out, partially masking the strange metallic odor, but not entirely. He looked at me, his eyes showing a mix of surprise and joy. "Hey, you're home early. Weren't you supposed to go to a dinner party with the clients tonight?" I stood there, nailed to the floor. Behind him, the living room lamps cast a warm glow. The curtains were neatly drawn, the Navajo rug was perfectly placed, the sofa was spotless, the coffee table was bare, no plastic tarps, no tools, no golden metal block, no trace of the forensic lab I had just witnessed. Everything was as perfect as a family catalog photo, except somewhere deep in my nasal passages, a faint, cold sliver of surgical alcohol and metal lingered, like a tiny thorn that couldn't be pulled out. I looked at Travis, looked at his smile, looked at his eyes, waiting for an answer. I knew that in this very moment, if I said the wrong thing, if I let slip that I had opened the door without knocking, the little game we thought was so sweet would instantly mutate into something else, something far more dangerous. I forced the corners of my mouth up. I held out the bouquet of baby's breath, trying to keep my voice as steady as possible. "I missed you, so I came home early. The rain is awful out there, so I just grabbed some groceries for dinner." Travis smiled, reached out to take the flowers, and leaned down to kiss my forehead, just like always. Come on in. You're soaking wet. I stepped over the threshold, my palms ice cold. And just as Travis turned to close the door, I caught a glimpse of his fingernail. Jammed deep in the cuticle was a tiny, dark reddish-brown smear, like something that had dried. It wasn't paint. It wasn't dirt. I swallowed hard. I knew that from the second I forgot those 3 knocks, this apartment was no longer the home I thought it was. And the man standing in front of me was no longer just my husband in any simple sense of the word. I walked into the apartment feeling like a stranger intruding in my own home. The living room was bathed in a warm yellow light. The rug lay flat. The sofa was pristine. Everything was exactly as I had left it this morning, perhaps even tidier. If I hadn't seen the scene with my own eyes, I might have convinced myself I hallucinated the whole thing. Travis placed the baby's breath in a glass vase on the dining table, his movements natural and fluid. He turned back to me, his eyes carrying that familiar, gentle warmth. "What are you standing there for? Go change. You're drenched." I nodded. "Yeah, I'll change right now." I bent down to take off my shoes, trying to keep my breathing even. As I lowered my head, my eyes caught that dark reddish-brown stain under his fingernail again. It was small, but it was lodged in a spot that was very difficult to clean with a quick wash. I used to be a forensic auditor. Small details like that always meant something. Travis noticed me looking. He quickly turned away and walked into the kitchen. "I'll start cooking. You go rest for a bit," he called out, his voice light, perhaps even more cheerful than usual. I stood up straight and scanned the living room one more time. My eyes swept over every corner. The floor was clear of plastic tarps, but if there had been heavy tape down, there should be residue. Nothing. Not a speck of adhesive. Not a single scratch. I felt a tingling sensation on my scalp. To erase all evidence so flawlessly in less than 3 minutes, that was the work of someone who had done this many, many times. I went into the bedroom and changed my clothes. The door clicked shut behind me. I leaned against the closet doors and let out a heavy breath. My brain shifted into analytical gear. 1. Travis wasn't surprised when he opened the door, meaning he fully believed the person knocking was me. 2. He took less than 3 minutes to revert the living room to normal. 3. That metal block was not a toy. 4. The dark red stain on his finger. I changed into dry clothes and walked out. Travis was in the kitchen, his back to me. He was chopping onions, his movements fast and rhythmic. The oil in the pan was sizzling, and the smell of cooking slowly overpowered the lingering metallic chill I could still sense. "What were you doing just now?" I asked, trying to sound completely nonchalant. The knife in his hand paused for exactly 1 beat. Just 1 beat. If you weren't paying close attention, you'd never notice. "Working on a model," he replied instantly. "A client ordered an architectural scale model. I was testing some joint fittings." Travis was an architect. The answer was perfectly logical. But architectural models didn't require nitrile surgical gloves, nor did they require wrapping the entire living room in plastic tarps. I nodded. "Oh, I see." I walked to the dining table and set down the grocery bags. I bought steak. "Let's make beef stew tonight." Travis turned around and smiled. "Perfect. I'm starving." His smile was identical to the man I had loved for 3 years. But the longer I looked, the more I felt an invisible barrier between us. A pane of bulletproof glass. I could see him clearly, but I couldn't touch him. We ate dinner like any other night. Travis talked about a commercial complex he was designing in Bellevue. I talked about the contract I just finalized. We even turned on the TV and watched a comedy special. On the surface, everything was terrifyingly normal, but inside me, an analytical machine had whirred to life. After dinner, Travis went to take a shower. I used the time to clean the kitchen. After washing the dishes, I dried my hands and walked slowly back into the living room. I crouched down to inspect the floorboards. Nothing. I sat on the sofa, leaned over, and looked at the gap beneath the coffee table. No plastic residue. But as I stood up, that scent drifted past again. Very faint surgical alcohol and metal. It wasn't coming from the living room. It was coming from the hallway leading to the guest bathroom. I walked slowly toward it. The water was running in the master bath. Travis was still showering. I opened the door to the guest bathroom, the one we rarely used. The metallic smell was stronger here. I looked down. In the corner, right next to the base of the toilet, was a tiny piece of blue plastic. I picked it up. Nitrile glove. A tiny fragment, like it had snagged and torn off when the glove was hurriedly removed. My heart pounded. I looked at the small trash can next to the sink. I lifted the lid. Inside were a few makeup remover pads I had used that morning, but at the very bottom was a crumpled paper towel. I carefully pulled it out and unrolled it. Inside were dark brown fibers mixed with something that looked like dried soil. I didn't recognize the fibers, but I was certain of one thing. They didn't come from any rug in our apartment. I wrapped the evidence up, put it in the pocket of my coat hanging in the bedroom, just as the water in the master shower stopped running. I walked back out to the living room right as Travis opened the door, a towel around his neck, his hair wet. He looked at me and smiled. "Not tired yet?" "No, just watching some TV." He walked over and sat next to me on the sofa. The distance between us was mere inches. I could hear his heartbeat. I wondered if that heart was beating with fear. He wrapped an arm around my shoulder and pulled me close. "I have to head to the construction site early tomorrow. Make sure you grab breakfast before you go to the firm." His voice was warm, just like always. I nodded. But in my head, the puzzle pieces were snapping together. The torn glove, the alcohol smell, the strange organic fibers, the complex metal block, and the dark reddish-brown stain. That night, Travis fell asleep very quickly. His breathing was deep and even, like a man without a single secret in the world. I lay awake, staring into the darkness. I recalled the joke he used to make. "The 3 knocks are our security signal." At the time, I thought it was just a romantic quirk. But now I understood. The 3 knocks weren't a signal for my comfort. The 3 knocks were to give him exactly enough time to erase everything before I walked in. I turned my head to look at the man lying next to me. A freezing thought crawled up my spine. If I hadn't knocked today, I would have seen something I was never meant to see. And maybe, from that exact moment, I had stepped into a deadly game without knowing the rules. I don't know when I finally fell asleep, but before my eyes closed, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I would start auditing our joint bank accounts, because in this world, every secret eventually leaves a paper trail. And I used to be the best in my firm at finding those trails. The next morning, Travis left the apartment earlier than usual. He wore a crisp light blue button-down, a neat collar, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder, looking like thousands of other men rushing to offices across Seattle. Before walking out the door, he turned back and hugged me, a routine gesture. "I'll be home early this afternoon. Let's go out for dinner." I nodded, forcing a natural smile. "Okay. Drive safe." The door closed, and the sound of his footsteps faded down the hallway. I stood still for a few seconds, listening. Once I was sure the elevator doors had closed and it was descending, I turned back to the living room and opened my laptop. Throughout our 3-year marriage, Travis and I used a joint financial management system. It was my idea. Given my background in forensic accounting, I viewed cash flow like a map. If you look closely enough, the whole story reveals itself. I logged into our joint bank portal. The data cascaded down the screen like a scroll. Electricity, water, groceries, gas, insurance, all normal. Travis wasn't a big spender. He lived simply, sometimes even a bit too frugally. But I wasn't looking for massive, glaring expenses. I was looking for recurring anomalies. 1 hour passed. Then 2. By late morning, my analytics software flagged a specific row. A recurring wire transfer, processed on the 15th of every month. The amount, $1,000. Not a massive sum, not enough to trigger fraud alerts, but consistent for exactly 2 years. I zoomed in on the recipient data. The account belonged to a company named Apex Heritage Restorations, LLC. It sounded completely mundane. I opened a browser and started digging. The search results were sparse. A small business registered in an old industrial park down in the Kent Valley. Listed operations: event organization, cultural heritage design, antique restoration. Antique restoration. I lingered on those words. The metal block I saw last night didn't look like an antique. It looked like a component for advanced machinery. I kept searching and found the name of the LLC's director, Leonard Barnes. I typed his name into Google. An old news article popped up, dated a little over a year ago. Headline: Body of adult male, found in abandoned Kent Valley warehouse. I clicked on the article. It was brief. A man in his 40s, listed as an antique restorer, was found dead in an old warehouse in the industrial district. Preliminary cause of death: industrial accident. The victim's name: Leonard Barnes. I read the name twice. It was the exact name registered to the company receiving Travis's monthly transfers. A cold sensation crept down my spine. If this man died a year ago, who was collecting the money? I pushed my chair back and stared at the laptop screen. $1,000 a month for 2 years. That's $24,000. That didn't look like a service fee. That looked like hush money. I shut the laptop and sat in silence. The image of last night flashed in my mind. The plastic-covered room, the dark golden block, the precision tools, and Travis kneeling like a priest. If he was just restoring antiques, why the heavy-duty tarps? Why the surgical gloves? Why the frantic 3-minute scrub down? I stood up and walked into the living room. The morning sun hadn't yet pierced through the windows, leaving the room in a dull gray light. Everything looked artificially peaceful. I walked around, scrutinizing every corner. This time, I wasn't looking for plastic. I was looking for something else. I knelt down near the base of the sofa, getting as close to the floorboards as possible. Tucked deep in the gap between the baseboard and the hardwood, something tiny glinted. I used my fingernail to pry it out. It was a bullet casing. But it was incredibly small. Not your standard handgun caliber. On the bottom of the casing, etched microscopically, were letters. Not English. They looked Cyrillic. I clenched the casing in my fist. A single question hammered in my brain. What the hell is my husband, the man who argues with me over whose turn it is to wash the dishes, involved in? That afternoon, I made another decision. I called an old friend. His name was Mike. We used to work at the same auditing firm before he transitioned into high-level cybersecurity. He was brilliant. And more importantly, he knew how to keep his mouth shut. The phone rang twice before he picked up. Lauren, long time no see. I tried to keep my voice steady. Mike, I need a favor. Can you run a background check on a company for me? Which one? Apex Heritage Restorations, LLC. Mike was silent for a few seconds. What kind of mess did you step into now? It's not a mess. Just professional curiosity. Mike chuckled dryly. When you get curious, Lauren, it usually means someone's hiding millions. Give me a few hours. Thanks, Mike. I hung up. The sky was getting dark. I decided to run to the grocery store. Not because I needed anything, but because I needed to get out of the apartment, needed to breathe. In the supermarket parking lot, as I walked back to my car, a strange sensation made me look down at the rear left tire. It was completely flat. I crouched down to inspect it. A clean, 5-inch gash ran right along the sidewall. It was perfectly straight. Not a nail, not a curb scrape. That was a knife wound. A very sharp blade. I stood up and looked around the parking lot. People were pushing carts, getting into cars, completely normal. No one was paying attention to me. But in that moment, the feeling was unmistakable. Someone was watching me. It wasn't paranoia. It was the instinct honed by years of corporate investigations. I got into the car and locked the doors, my hands shaking slightly but my mind terrifyingly clear. 3 things had happened in less than 24 hours. 1. I discovered my husband's secret. 2. I found a dead man's money trail. 3. My tire was slashed. This wasn't a coincidence. I grabbed my phone to call a tow truck, but it buzzed in my hand. A text from Mike. Just one line. Lauren, the company you asked about isn't normal. It's a shell for a Black Ops military tech project. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding against my ribs. A second text arrived. The guy running the shell is dead, but the project was never shut down. Then, a third. Be careful. If your husband is tied up in this, you are not safe. I locked my phone screen. Outside, the Seattle rain began to fall again. I watched the drops slide down the windshield like long, jagged scratches. For the first time in my life, my marriage felt like a double-sided painting. The front was love, home-cooked meals, and movie nights. The back was something unimaginably dangerous. And I had just accidentally peeled the canvas back. As I waited in the car, I had no idea that at the far end of the parking lot, a black SUV was idling, and the person inside had been watching me the entire time. That evening, I took an Uber home in the rain. Alaskan Way was a blur of neon reflections, traffic crawling forward like a tired, metallic snake. I tried to stare out the window, but my mind kept looping Mike's 3 texts. A shell for a Black Ops project. The director is dead. You are not safe. I had never thought my life would ever intersect with the words military tech. I was a contract auditor. I dealt with numbers, clauses, and signatures. The most dangerous things in my line of work were usually cleverly hidden liability loopholes. But now, it seemed the trap had moved off the paper and into the real world. The Uber dropped me off at my building. As I walked into the lobby, instinct made me scan the area. Nothing out of the ordinary. A guy walking his dog, a woman holding a toddler, someone on their phone. It looked normal, but I no longer felt normal. I took the elevator up. The hallway lights flickered slightly. As always, I stopped in front of my door. This time, I remembered perfectly. I raised my fist. Knock, knock, knock. The door opened almost instantly. Travis stood there, a dish towel thrown over his shoulder. You're back. I'm making clam chowder. His voice was gentle, his face entirely serene. I stepped inside, looking closely at everything. The living room was as pristine as it had been this morning. No trace of anything, no metallic scent, but I knew that didn't mean it had all vanished. In the kitchen, the chowder was simmering on the stove, smelling like cream and sea salt. Travis was at the counter, slicing bread. Looking at him right now, no one in the world would link this man to Cyrillic bullet casings or Black Ops projects. I leaned against the kitchen wall, watching him. Travis, yeah? Have you ever worked with a company called Apex Heritage? My question dropped into the air like a lead weight. Travis didn't turn around immediately. He turned down the heat on the stove, set down the knife. Which company? Apex. The antique restoration place. He finally turned to look at me. His expression was quick, composed, but I caught the micro-expression, a tiny flicker of tension. Ah, I think so. They contracted me to design a small exhibition space for them a while ago. He said smoothly. Too smoothly. Why do you ask? Nothing. Just read an article about them today. I shrugged, feigning indifference. Travis nodded and went back to setting the table. Let's eat. We sat down. Dinner was quieter than usual. Neither of us said much. The only sound was the clinking of spoons against porcelain bowls. Suddenly, my cell phone buzzed. An unknown number. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Hello? Silence on the other end. Just the faint hiss of static. I thought it was a spam call and was about to hang up when a voice spoke. It was a low, raspy male voice, sounding slightly distorted, like he was speaking through a voice scrambler. Are you Lauren? Ice shot through my veins. Who is this? The voice ignored my question, maintaining a slow, rhythmic cadence. You shouldn't go digging into things that don't belong to you. I looked up at Travis. He was looking down at his bowl, but I saw his hand freeze midair. I think you have the wrong number, I said, forcing steel into my voice. No. The voice was absolute. We never dial the wrong number. A heavy pause hung on the line for a few seconds, then the voice continued, slow and deliberate. Tell the artisan to have the package ready. Time is running out. Before I could ask anything else, the line went dead. I held the phone, my hand trembling slightly. Travis finally looked up. Is everything okay? Telemarketer? I set the phone face down on the table. But in my head, the words echoed violently. Tell the artisan to have the package ready. The artisan. That wasn't Travis's real name. It wasn't his architectural title. It was a code name. I looked at him. He was still eating, his face impassive. But I realized something in that moment. He had heard. He had heard the entire call, and he knew exactly who the voice was talking about. After dinner, Travis cleared the table while I stepped out onto the fire escape balcony. The rain had stopped, and the Seattle skyline was brilliant against the dark clouds. But inside me, there was only a massive void. If that call was meant for Travis, it meant they knew who I was. They knew where I lived. They knew I had started digging. It meant I was being watched. Just then, my phone buzzed again. Texts from Mike. Lauren, I dug deeper. Apex doesn't just restore antiques. They were a front for K, 2K Corporation. They handled a highly classified mechanical engineering project a few years ago. The project is tied to a device codenamed Damocles. I felt my heart skip a beat. Damocles. The name sounded exactly like what it was. A sword hanging over our heads. The final text from Mike popped up. I don't know what the hell your husband is mixed up in, but if he actually has his hands on Damocles, you need to pack a bag and get out of there right now. I locked the phone. The balcony door slid open behind me. Travis stepped out, handing me a glass of water. You're acting strange tonight. I took the glass. I'm fine. He looked at me for a long time. His eyes were no longer the calm, collected eyes of an architect. Lauren, is there something you want to ask me? I looked deep into his eyes. In that fleeting second, I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask about the bullet casing, about Apex, about Damocles, about the black SUV. But I didn't. I just shook my head. No. Travis gave a slow, barely perceptible nod. He turned and went back inside. I stayed on the balcony alone. Down on the street below, the headlights of a black SUV flashed on, then immediately shut off. I had no idea how long it had been parked there, but as I stared down into the darkness, I felt with absolute certainty that whoever was in that car was looking right back up at my apartment. I barely slept that night. Travis lay beside me, his breathing deep and steady, as if nothing in the universe could disturb his peace. I lay with my back to him, staring at the window. City lights bled through the thin curtains, painting pale streaks across the wall. My mind spun like a centrifuge. The cryptic phone call, the codename The Artisan, Project Damocles, the black SUV on the street, and above all, Travis, the man I'd shared a life with for 3 years, ate dinner with, shared a bed with. I suddenly realized how terrifyingly little I knew about him. The next morning, Travis left for work as usual. He even kissed my forehead before grabbing his keys. I'll be home early tonight. Okay, I replied curtly. When the door clicked shut, I sat at the dining table and opened my laptop. I went back into the bank accounts. This time, I dug deeper. Beyond the $1,000 monthly transfers to Apex, there were other scattered, irregular microtransfers. They didn't follow a date pattern, but they all went to obscure shell accounts. The amounts were small, but they all shared one trait. No memo, no description. That was entirely unlike Travis. He was meticulous. If he transferred money, he always noted what it was for. Except for these, I stared at the screen for a long time. In my profession, there's a simple rule. When someone tries too hard to make everything look perfectly normal, they are usually hiding something violently abnormal. I came home early that afternoon. I wanted to talk to Travis. No beating around the bush, no guessing games. I wanted to look him in the eye and demand the truth. Around 6 p.m., the door unlocked. Travis walked in, holding a bag of groceries. Got some fresh salmon from Pike Place. Let's grill tonight. He smiled that familiar smile. I stared at him. Travis. Yeah? We need to talk. He set the groceries down on the counter. About what? I didn't hesitate. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out 3 items. The torn piece of blue nitrile glove, the Cyrillic bullet casing, and a printout of the wire transfers. I placed them deliberately on the kitchen island. The room went dead silent. Travis looked at the items. For a fraction of a second, the blood drained from his face. It was instantaneous, but I saw it. I found these, I said, my voice dangerously steady. Do you want to explain? Travis didn't speak immediately. He pulled out a bar stool and sat down across from me. He placed his hands on the counter, but his fingers were trembling slightly. Lauren, he said softly. Shouldn't what? I cut him off. Shouldn't ask what my own husband does for a living? He looked at me, exhaustion flooding his eyes. It's better if you don't know. That sentence was a spark to gasoline. No! I stood up abruptly. I saw you in the living room the other day. You were in a hazmat suit. The whole room was draped in plastic. I found a bullet casing under the couch. I found the money you're wiring to a dead man's company. I shoved the bank statement toward him. And last night, someone called me, looking for the artisan. Are you seriously going to tell me everything is fine? Travis closed his eyes. He rubbed his face with both hands, as if trying to hold himself together. After a long moment, he opened his eyes. Lauren. I'm sorry. My chest tightened. Sorry for what? He looked straight at me. I'm not just an architect. The air in the kitchen felt as thick as molasses. Then what are you? Travis paused, then spoke slowly. I'm a cleaner. I clean up things that aren't supposed to exist. I stared at him, bewildered. What does that even mean? Travis exhaled heavily. There are items, highly dangerous assets. If they fall into the wrong hands, the fallout would be catastrophic. My job is to make sure they disappear without a trace. I shook my head. Are you talking about objects? Or people? Travis's head snapped up. No, I don't kill people. His voice was urgent. I only handle hardware, tech components, mechanical prototypes, things that shouldn't exist. I looked at the bullet casing on the counter. Then what about this? Travis looked at it, his eyes heavy. He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could, all the lights in the apartment went out. We were plunged into absolute darkness. I jumped. Power outage? No. Travis's voice instantly dropped to a lethal whisper. That's not a power outage. I heard a microscopic scraping sound coming from the front door, metal sliding against metal. Someone was picking the lock. Travis shot up from the stool. He grabbed my wrist. Follow me. Now. What's happening? Don't ask. He dragged me down the hall toward his home office. In the dark, he opened the massive oak bookcase that covered the far wall. He shoved his weight against a specific corner of the shelving unit. A dull thud echoed. And the entire bookcase slid sideways. Behind it was a narrow, pitch-black passageway. I froze. I had lived in this apartment for 3 years and had no idea this existed. Get in, Travis ordered. What about you? I have to deal with them. I gripped his arm tightly. Travis. He looked at me. His eyes, even in the dark, were no longer the eyes of the mild-mannered husband I knew. They were cold, sharp, and brutally determined. Lauren, listen to me. His voice was rough. No matter what you hear, do not come out. He pushed me into the dark passage. The heavy bookcase slid shut behind me. As the darkness sealed me in, I heard a distinct crack from the living room. The front door had been breached. A massive crash echoed from the living room, the sound of furniture splintering, followed by heavy bodies slamming against drywall. I flinched, pressing my back against the cold, damp concrete of the narrow space to keep from falling. Then came the sound of glass shattering, chairs scraping violently across the hardwood, and the guttural grunts of men fighting. I recognized Travis's voice, but he wasn't yelling. He was making sharp, focused exhalations, the sound of someone engaged in brutal, efficient, hand-to-hand combat. I had never seen Travis fight. In our 3 years together, he was a gentle soul, sometimes even a bit reserved. He liked reading, sketching blueprints, and tending to the potted plants on our balcony. But the sounds bleeding through the wall were not the sounds of an architect. Bang! A gunshot rang out. The thick walls muffled it, but the concussive pop was enough to make me jump out of my skin. I bit down hard on my lip to stop myself from screaming. No matter what you hear, do not come out. Travis's warning echoed in my skull. I forced myself to slide down the wall and sit on the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I didn't know how many men were out there, who they were, or what Travis was facing. But I knew one thing for certain. The things I had discovered over the last 48 hours were no longer just marital secrets. This was a war. The fighting lasted for less than a minute. Then, sudden, absolute silence. Not a peaceful quiet, but the terrifying stillness that follows a bomb blast. I held my breath. I waited 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Not a single sound. "Travis?" I whispered, even though I knew he couldn't hear me through the wall. No answer. I stood up and felt my way along the wall. The hidden room was smaller than I thought, maybe 30 square feet. In the corner, my hand brushed against a folding chair and a small metal table. On the table was a tactical flashlight. I clicked it on. The harsh white beam cut through the dark. It was a pre-stocked panic room. Cases of bottled water, a trauma med kit, and an old smartphone. I picked up the phone. No passcode. The screen unlocked immediately. There were no contacts, no messages. Just a single app. A closed-circuit security feed. My pulse skyrocketed. I tapped the app. The screen flickered, showing the living room. The camera had switched to night vision, bathing the image in grainy green light. The sight made my blood run cold. Our living room looked like a war zone. The coffee table was smashed to pieces, the sofa flipped over, the Navajo rug bunched up against the wall. Shards of glass littered the floor. But what paralyzed me was the blood. Not a pool, but a distinct drag mark running from the front door to the center of the room. I scoured the screen. No one was there. The intruders were gone. Travis was gone. I zoomed in on the camera feed. Next to the shattered remains of the TV stand, something glinted in the night vision. The dark, golden metal block. It was lying on the floor, right next to the shards of a ceramic vase I had loved. Travis had dropped it. I stared at the screen. That object, the thing Travis called a package that needed to be cleaned. The thing that prompted death threats over the phone. The thing that brought armed men kicking down my door in the middle of the night. That was what they came for. I sank back into the folding chair, my whole body shaking. If they didn't find it, they would come back. Time slowed to a crawl. I don't know how long I sat in that concrete box. It could have been an hour. It could have been 3. Only when the faint light bleeding through a tiny air vent started to turn gray did I realize it was almost dawn. I stood up, gripping the flashlight, and placed my hand on the hidden door mechanism. I hesitated. If I opened it, I might see things I could never unsee. But if I stayed, I would never know what happened. I took a deep breath and shoved the release latch. The bookcase slid open. Pale morning light filtered through the living room windows. The devastation looked even worse in full color. Furniture destroyed, walls dented. The smear of blood dried into a sickening rust color. I stepped out carefully. "Travis?" I called out. Silence. I checked the bedroom, the bathrooms, the balcony. Empty. I walked back to the living room. The golden metal block was still there. I crouched down and picked it up. It was shockingly heavy, its surface ice cold. The microscopic gears meshed together with terrifying perfection. On one corner, etched in a font so small I had to squint, was a serial code, K27DELTAK2. I had never seen it before, but I knew one thing. Travis hadn't disappeared by accident. He had been taken, and the thing they wanted was currently resting in the palm of my hand. I stood in the ruins of my life, holding the freezing metal, and a sudden realization hit me. If Travis had truly wanted to hide this, why was it left out in the open? Did he drop it on purpose? Did he leave it for me? I scanned the wreckage again, a hard knot of determination tightening in my chest. This game wasn't over. It had just begun. I stood amidst the wreckage of my living room, the freezing metal block heavy in my hand. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the jagged shards of glass scattered across the floorboards. My familiar, comfortable apartment now looked like a crime scene. But what terrified me most was the silence. No Travis. No sign that he had ever been here. Just the long smear of blood drying on the floor. I knelt down to examine it. It wasn't a massive amount of blood, but enough to prove the fight had been vicious. It started near the entryway, trailed for about 6 feet, and ended in a smeared drag mark, as if someone unconscious had been hauled away. I swallowed hard, the thought making my hands shake. I placed the metal block on the dining table. Suddenly, this small object felt like it weighed a ton. If those men came here for it, and if Travis was abducted because of it, then the most dangerous thing in this apartment was sitting right in front of me. I sat down, forcing my mind to clear. Travis was calculating. If he knew this might happen, he definitely prepared for it. I started searching. Not tearing the place apart like a panicked victim, but thinking methodically, following Travis's logic. He always hid important things in plain sight. I walked into his home office. The room was small but meticulously organized. Blueprints, a high-end desktop, architecture books stacked neatly. Looking at this room, nobody would suspect its owner was tied to Black Ops tech and gunfights. I opened his desk drawers. Pens, drafting rulers, sketch pads. I opened the second drawer, a leather-bound moleskin notebook. I pulled it out and flipped it open. The first few pages were standard architectural drafts, but halfway through, the sketches changed. No longer floor plans or elevations, but mechanical schematics gears, rotational axes, incredibly complex structures that perfectly matched the metal block on the table. My heart kicked into overdrive. I flipped through the pages frantically. On the very last page, there was a single paragraph of handwritten text. "Lauren, if you are reading this, it means I didn't make it back." I stopped breathing. I forced my eyes to read the next line. "I am so sorry for dragging you into this." The handwriting was slanted, exactly how he wrote notes on his blueprints. "The object you have is not an antique. It is a mechanical failsafe key for Project Damocles." I collapsed into the desk chair. Damocles. The word from Mike's text. I kept reading. 3 years ago, I contracted for a massive defense engineering firm. They didn't just build consumer tech. They ran a highly classified Black Ops division. They built something that shouldn't exist. I gripped the notebook so hard my knuckles turned white. I can't tell you exactly what it is, but if completed, it would shift the balance of power across the globe. I managed to sabotage the main framework, but there was one component I couldn't destroy. A mechanical master key. "The thing you are holding." I looked through the doorway at the metal block sitting on the dining table. It was no longer a puzzle. It was a target on my back. I looked back down. The men who came for me aren't cops or feds. They are K2K Corporation operatives. They call me the Artisan. I remembered the distorted voice on the phone. "Tell the Artisan to have the package ready." I read on. "They won't stop until they get the key back. If they take me, they will assume you know nothing. That is your only advantage. Tears burned the edges of my eyes. Lauren, if you want to survive, take that key and throw it in the Puget Sound. Burn it. Destroy it. 2K is a Leviathan. You cannot fight them. I stopped at the very last line. The ink was pressed deep into the paper, written in a desperate hurry. But if you decide you need to find me, start at the place we first met. I looked up. The place we first met. A rundown, indie coffee shop in Capitol Hill. 3 years ago, on a rainy Seattle afternoon. I closed the notebook. The apartment was bright now, still in ruins, Travis still gone. But for the first time since the lights went out, I didn't feel entirely lost. He had left me a trail. I stood up and grabbed the metal block. It felt heavy and cold. The thought was crystal clear. If I threw it into the ocean, I might live, but I would never know what happened to my husband. I looked at the notebook one last time. But if you decide you need to find me, I exhaled slowly. 3 years ago, I fell in love with this man because he always did the right thing, even when it was difficult. Maybe it was my turn. I grabbed my car keys, dropped the metal block into my purse, and walked out the door. Stepping into the hallway, the morning sun hit the windowsill at the end of the corridor. I knew that as of this exact second, my normal life was dead. The hunt for Travis had just begun. I drove out of the parking garage just as the city was waking up. The familiar streets of Seattle were already packing with early commuter traffic on I-5, cars bumper to bumper like a slow-moving river of steel. Everything looked relentlessly normal, but inside my head, the world had inverted. I was no longer the safe, corporate auditor I was yesterday. Inside my leather tote bag sat a chunk of Black Ops hardware that my husband had risked his life to steal. And somewhere in this city, men were willing to kill to get it back. I parked a few blocks away from a small, independent coffee shop nestled in a side street off Capitol Hill. The place was weathered, the wooden sign faded by years of Pacific Northwest rain. But to me, it was a landmark. 3 years ago, I met Travis here. I had just walked out of a miserable corporate seminar down the street when a sudden downpour hit. I ducked into this cafe to escape the rain. Travis was sitting by the window, and we struck up a conversation about a book he was reading. It started so simply. I killed the engine and stared at the storefront. If Travis said start where we first met, he had left something here. I walked inside. The bell chimed just like it used to. The slow rotation of ceiling fans pushed the rich smell of roasted espresso through the air. An older barista, a guy in his 60s with a gray beard, was wiping down the counter. He looked up, his eyes locking onto me, and gave a slow nod. "Have a seat," he said quietly. I picked the table by the window. Our table! My heart beat faster. I ordered a black coffee. While waiting, I scanned the room. Nothing seemed out of place. But I knew Travis didn't play games without a reason. The old man brought the mug over and set it down. "Been a while since you came around." I blinked, surprised. "You remember me?" He smiled kindly. "Small shop. We remember the regulars." I stayed silent for a moment before deciding to push my luck. "Sir," did a tall man with glasses, who used to sit here reading, come in a few days ago? The barista's expression darkened slightly. "Your husband?" I nodded. He spoke slowly. "Yeah, he was here." My chest tightened. "He came in 2 days ago." I leaned forward. "Did he say anything?" He didn't answer right away. He walked back behind the counter, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small manila envelope. He walked back and slid it across the table. He told me, "If you ever walked through that door alone, I was to give you this." I stared at the envelope. My name, Lauren, was scrawled on it in Travis's handwriting. I ripped it open. Inside was a small piece of paper and a brass key. Not a high-tech key, just a standard padlock key. I unfolded the paper. One line. "Old bookstore on First Avenue, aisle 27. I frowned. A bookstore? Why would Travis layer his clues like this? I looked up to ask the barista, but he had already retreated to the back room, making it clear he was done talking. I shoved the envelope into my purse, downed the scalding coffee, and stood up. As I reached the door, the old man's voice called out, "Miss." I turned around. He looked at me with a heavy sadness. "Your friend." He looked like a dead man walking that day. My grip tightened on the door handle. "Did he say anything else?" The old man shook his head. "Just one thing," he said. "I pray to God she never has to come looking for this." I stood frozen for a second, then nodded my thanks and walked out. The morning air was crisp. I sat in my car but didn't start the engine. I pulled out my phone and looked at the text from Mike. Kaduka Corporation. Damocles. The pieces were locking into place. Travis knew they were closing in. He set up this breadcrumb trail, knowing he was going to be taken. I started the car and drove straight to First Avenue. The old bookstore was sandwiched between a dive bar and a vacant lot, looking like a relic from the 90s. The wooden sign was rotting, the windows caked with grime. I pushed the door open, immediately hit by the smell of decaying paper and dust. Floor-to-ceiling shelves were crammed with thousands of forgotten books. An elderly man was asleep behind the register. I walked straight to aisle 27. My heart hammered against my ribs. Aisle 27 was filled with outdated science and engineering textbooks. I started pulling books off the shelf. Nothing. The 10th book, the 20th, then the 27th book from the left. A massive blue cloth hardcover on thermodynamic physics. I pulled it out. It was suspiciously light. I opened the cover. The pages had been hollowed out. Nestled in the center of the cutout was a micro USB drive. I stared at it. Travis hadn't just left a key. He left data. I pinched the USB drive between my fingers. Right at that moment, the floorboards creaked behind me. "So, you found it." A voice like cracking ice. My blood ran cold. I turned my head. 3 men in dark trench coats were standing at the end of the aisle. The man in the center stepped forward. In his hand was a photograph. A photo of me. "Lauren," he said smoothly, "we've been looking for you all morning." I clenched the USB in my fist, my heart threatening to explode. He smiled. A dead, reptilian smile. "Don't panic. We just want to talk." I knew exactly what kind of people they were. They didn't talk. I took a slow step backward. My back bumped into the bookshelf. To my left, the aisle fed deeper into the labyrinth of the store. The man read my body language. "You aren't going anywhere," he said. The 2 men behind him fanned out, moving to block the adjacent aisles. They were boxing me in. I darted my eyes around. The store was a claustrophobic maze. Shelves towering over my head, but that meant there were blind spots. I took a deep breath, faked a step to the right, then spun left and sprinted down the narrow corridor between the shelves. "Grab her!" the leader barked. Heavy combat boots thundered against the wood floor behind me. The store was a rat warren. I ripped around 2 corners, books cascading off the shelves as I brushed past them. She went toward the back. I gripped the USB tight. If they caught me, Travis was as good as dead. And so was I. I sprinted toward the back wall and hit a dead end. Panic flared. The footsteps were closing in fast. I looked wildly to my right, a small, peeling wooden door, probably a storage closet. I threw my weight against the handle. It gave way. I dove inside and slammed it shut, throwing the deadbolt. It was a tiny supply closet, stacked high with cardboard boxes. A single, dingy bulb buzzed overhead. I pressed my back against the door, holding my breath. Outside, the heavy footsteps skidded to a halt. "She went in here," a voice growled. I scanned the room. No back door, but high up on the wall, about shoulder height, was a small ventilation window. I dragged a heavy box of books over, climbed up, and popped the latch. The window swung out into an alley. I scrambled through, scraping my elbows on the brick. The second my feet hit the wet asphalt of the alley, a massive crash echoed from inside the closet. They had kicked the door in. I didn't look back. I sprinted down the alleyway, bursting out onto the crowded sidewalk near Pike Place Market. Tourists, commuters, delivery trucks, the chaos of the city swallowed me. I wove violently through the crowd, bumping into shoulders. But seconds later, I glanced back and saw one of the men burst out of the alley. His eyes scanned the crowd and locked onto me. He started shoving people aside, sprinting after me. I jaywalked across a busy intersection, horns blaring, tires screeching as a delivery truck slammed on its brakes, missing me by inches. I didn't stop. I bolted into the lower levels of the market. A maze of artisan stalls and fishmongers. The noise was deafening, people shouting over each other, the smell of raw fish and rain. I dodged past a fruit stand. "Hey, watch it!" a vendor yelled. I glanced back. The man was still coming, relentless. I took a sharp left down a narrow corridor lined with fabric and craft stalls. Suddenly, an arm shot out and yanked me behind a heavy velvet curtain. I gasped, but a hand clamped over my mouth. An older woman with sharp eyes put a finger to her lips. "Quiet," she whispered. Seconds later, the heavy thud of the man's boots ran right past our stall. He slowed down, looked around, confused, and kept running toward the exit. The woman slowly released me. She sighed. "Those guys chasing you?" I nodded, breathless. "You know them?" She shook her head. "No, but I know trouble when I see it." "Thank you," I gasped. She looked at me sternly. "You need to get out of here, honey." I waited until I was sure the coast was clear before slipping out the back of the market. My heart was still hammering against my ribs. I opened my hand. The USB drive was still there, slick with sweat. I let out a shaky breath. But I knew this wasn't over. If they found me at the bookstore, they were tracking my movements. I couldn't go home. They'd be waiting. I needed a safe place, a place with a secure computer to crack this drive. A place no one would expect. Mike, my cybersecurity friend. If anyone on Earth could open this drive without triggering a trap, it was him. I hailed a taxi on 4th Avenue. "You, District," I told the driver. As the cab merged into traffic, I sank into the back seat. For the first time in my life, this city felt overwhelmingly vast and incredibly lethal. The taxi pulled up to a quiet, tree-lined street in the University District. I paid the driver and stepped out. The neighborhood was full of older, craftsman-style homes, mostly occupied by grad students and tech recluses. The late afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows across the pavement. But my nerves were still wired tight. Mike lived at the end of a cul-de-sac. We went to college together. He was a ghost online, an introvert who now worked as a high-level penetration tester for tech giants in Silicon Valley. If there was a lock on that USB, Mike was the key. I walked up to his gray, unassuming front door. I knocked 3 times. A minute later, the deadbolt clicked. Mike stood there in a faded hoodie and jeans, pushing his glasses up his nose. He looked genuinely surprised. "Lauren, can I come in?" He glanced down the street, his paranoia kicking in, then pulled me inside and locked the heavy deadbolt behind us. "What the hell is going on?" "You never drop by." I didn't waste time. I reached into my bag, pulled out the micro USB, and dropped it on his kitchen island. Travis was taken. Mike froze. "What?" I gave him the hyper-compressed version. The plastic-wrapped room. The K2K goons kicking down my door. The chase in Pike Place. And this USB. Mike's face drained of color. He looked at the flash drive like it was a live hand grenade. "Lauren, do you have any idea what this might be?" "I don't know." I looked him dead in the eye. "But I know it's tied to Damocles." Mike went dead silent. He slowly pulled out a bar stool and sat down. "Damocles isn't a joke, Lauren. You know what it is." He nodded grimly. "In the InfoSec world, it's an urban legend." "An urban legend?" Mike tapped the counter. "The rumor is, it's an omnidirectional financial backdoor. If someone holds the master key, they can bypass global banking encryption. They can manipulate stock markets, drain sovereign wealth funds, or crash an entire country's economy in a keystroke. A chill ran down my spine. Travis had said it could shift the balance of power if K2K is actually the architect behind Damocles, Mike continued. Then Travis getting black-bagged makes perfect sense. I pushed the USB toward him. Can you open it? Mike stared at me. Lauren, if this is actual Damocles source code, we are holding radioactive material. Travis is out there, I said, my voice cold and hard. He might be getting tortured right now to give up this exact drive. Mike didn't say anything. This is my only lead, Mike. He exhaled a long, heavy breath. Fine. He stood up and walked over to his workstation in the corner of the living room. It was a chaotic mess of servers, cables, and 3 massive curved monitors. He grabbed a beaten-up ThinkPad laptop from a drawer. I'm using an air-gapped machine. No Wi-Fi card, no Bluetooth. If there's a tracker or a self-executing malware worm on this, it can't phone home. He plugged the drive in. The screen lit up. A single folder appeared. The name, DMC. Damocles, Mike muttered. He opened the folder. Inside were 3 files. An MP4 video, an encrypted database file, and a text document. Mike opened the video first. Travis's face appeared on screen. He was sitting in front of a blank white wall, looking exhausted. His voice was deep and grave. Lauren, if you are watching this, things have gone to hell. I gripped the edge of the desk. Travis continued. This drive contains a fragment of the Damocles protocol. It's not enough to weaponize the system, but it is enough to mathematically prove it exists. Mike looked at me. I nodded for him to let it play. K2K will tear the city apart to get this back, Travis said to the camera. But you need to understand, if they succeed, it's not just about money. It's about global extortion. It's an act of war. The room was silent except for the hum of Mike's servers. Travis looked directly into the lens. Lauren, I'm so sorry I brought this to our door. But I know you. I know you'll make the right call. The video ended. Mike spun his chair around. Lauren, do you understand the scale of this? I stared at the black screen, seeing Travis's face burned into my retinas. I understand one thing. What? I clenched my fists. I have to find him, Mike sighed, running a hand through his hair. The problem is, we don't know where they took him. I pointed at the screen. There's an encrypted data file. The answer might be in there. Mike nodded. It's heavy encryption. But give me time. I can brute force the outer layer. How long? He winced. A few hours. Minimum. Do it. Mike turned back to the keyboards. Lines of code began cascading down the monitors in a blur of green and white. I sat in a chair behind him, watching the glow of the screens reflect off the walls. My mind was singular. Travis was waiting, and his clock was ticking down. Mike's living room was bathed in the harsh, blue-green light of 3 massive monitors. Strings of alphanumeric code flew across the screens in a waterfall of data, illuminating his hyper-focused face. The mechanical clacking of his keyboard sounded like a machine gun that never ran out of ammo. I sat on the couch behind him, my hands clasped together so tightly my knuckles ached. With every minute that passed, the weight in my chest grew heavier. Outside, Seattle continued its oblivious hum. Traffic, sirens, people living normal lives. But inside this room, I felt like I was standing on a landmine, waiting for the click. Mike suddenly stopped typing. Got it. I sprang off the couch. You cracked it? Not the whole payload, he said, adjusting his glasses. But I broke the first partition. A digital map flashed onto the center monitor. Mike pointed to a cluster of red coordinates flashing in the southern sector of the city. Look here, I leaned in. The map zoomed into a large industrial parcel right on the waterfront. That's the old Sodoport district, I said, squinting. Why there? The decrypted file spit out a GPS breadcrumb, Mike explained. He typed another command, overlaying a high-res satellite image, An abandoned maritime warehouse appeared, its corrugated steel roof rusted brown, surrounded by cracked asphalt and overgrown weeds. "Look closely," Mike said, pointing a pen at the screen. "This satellite pass is from 3 days ago." I leaned closer. Parked tightly against the blind side of the warehouse were 3 black, unmarked semi-trailers and a black SUV. "An abandoned port warehouse with a motorcade parked out back," Mike said flatly. "That's a black site." My heart slammed against my ribs. "He's there!" Mike looked up at me. "Lauren, let's not jump to conclusions. It's not a coincidence," I said, my voice hard. "Travis left those coordinates for a reason." Mike leaned back in his chair. "If K2K is holding him there, this is a fortress. Then we have to go to that fortress." Mike stared at me like I had lost my mind. "Lauren, that's a corporate hit squad operating a black site. We are 2 civilians. I type for a living, and you audit spreadsheets." I stared right back, not blinking. "And Travis is my husband." Mike held my gaze. He knew I wasn't backing down. If I had to walk into Soto alone with a tire iron, I was going to do it. After a long, agonizing silence, Mike let out a heavy sigh and swore under his breath. "Fine." He pulled up another window on his rig. "But if we're doing this, we do it my way." He pulled up blueprints of the Soto port facilities. "This warehouse has 3 entry points: main loading dock, a waterfront access door, and a utility alley for service trucks." He circled the utility alley. "Main dock will be guarded. We approach from the blind side." I nodded. "I've got a tactical drone," Mike said, walking over to a metal Pelican case in the corner. I raised an eyebrow. "You just have a tactical drone?" Mike offered a humorless smile. "When you get paid to break into secure corporate facilities digitally, sometimes you need to see what the physical security looks like." The tension in the room was suffocating, but the plan was coming together. Mike pulled the USB drive from the air-gapped laptop and dropped it into a Faraday bag. "The core payload is still locked, but the GPS data was real." "Do you think Travis knew they were going to take him?" I asked. "Yeah," Mike said, zipping his tactical backpack. "He left this as a breadcrumb, a distress beacon." I remembered Travis's face in the video. "I know you'll make the right call. He trusted me to come for him." Mike pulled out a dark windbreaker and tossed it to me. "Put this on." As I zipped it up, he looked at me dead serious. "Lauren, from the second we step out of this house, the rules change. We are trespassing on a black site run by mercenaries who do not leave witnesses." I took a deep breath. "I know. You aren't scared?" I thought about the blood smeared across my living room floor. I thought about the men hunting me through Pike Place. "I've been terrified since yesterday," I said quietly. "But if I don't do this, I'll be a coward for the rest of my life." Mike nodded once. "All right, let's move." We slipped out the back door and got into Mike's stealthy electric SUV. We drove south on I-5, exiting into the industrial wasteland of Soto. Neither of us spoke. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the wet pavement. I stared out the window into the dark. Somewhere inside that rusted metal box, Travis was waiting, or bleeding, or worse. I gripped the door handle. Mike killed the headlights as we turned down a potholed access road near the port. "We're here." My pulse pounded in my ears. Tonight was the night. Everything ended here. Mike parked his SUV behind a stack of rotting shipping containers about 200 yards from the warehouse. From our vantage point, the massive corrugated steel structure loomed in the dark, pressed right up against the edge of the Puget Sound. The area had been decommissioned years ago. By day, it was a ghost town. By night, it was a graveyard. The wind blew off the water, carrying the bitter scent of salt water, diesel fuel, and oxidized iron. Mike killed the engine and turned to me. "Stay low. Step where I step," I nodded. He opened his backpack and pulled out a drone the size of a dinner plate. He set it on the hood of the car and powered it on. The rotors hummed to life, barely a whisper. "It's got FLIR thermal imaging," Mike muttered, his eyes locked on a modified tablet. "Let's see the head count." The drone lifted into the air, vanishing into the night sky, and glided silently toward the warehouse. Mike operated the sticks with gamer-like precision. I huddled next to him, watching the thermal feed on the screen. "Vehicles," Mike noted. I saw them. 3 glowing heat signatures of SUVs parked near the main loading bays. "Dropping altitude," Mike said. The camera swept down. Outside the loading bays, 2 human heat signatures glowed bright orange. One was smoking a cigarette, the other had a rifle slung across his chest. 2 tangos on the main door. "Heavily armed," Mike whispered. He flew the drone around the perimeter, toward the waterfront side. There was a massive roll-up freight door, chained shut from the inside, but next to it was a standard steel personnel door. Mike zoomed the thermal camera in. "No heat signatures. Utility door is clear." I stared at the screen. "That's our way in." Mike brought the drone up high and put it in an automated holding pattern. "There's definitely more inside. If they're interrogating Travis, they'll be in the sublevel or a soundproofed office." "Sublevel?" I swallowed hard. "Like a basement? Old port warehouses always have utility basements or storm cellars," Mike said, packing the controller away. "If they're hurting him, that's where they'll do it." "Let's go," I said. We left the vehicle and moved silently through the wet, overgrown grass, sticking to the deep shadows cast by the abandoned shipping containers. Every step felt agonizingly loud. When we reached the rusted metal wall of the warehouse, Mike held up a fist. We froze. He peeked around the corner. Clear. We crept up to the steel personnel door. The deadbolt looked heavy, industrial. Mike pulled a sleek, motorized lockpick gun from his jacket. "Stand back." He slid the needle into the keyhole and pressed the trigger. It buzzed like a mechanical bee. 5 seconds later, a heavy thunk echoed. The bolt slid back. Mike eased the door open, pitch black inside. He clicked on a penlight, shielding the beam with his fingers. We stepped into a cavernous, echoing space. Towering rusted steel racks loomed like skeletons. Wooden crates were stacked haphazardly. In the distance, light spilled out from underneath a heavy office door. Mike clicked the light off. Bingo. We crept forward, sliding between the aisles of steel racks. Muffled voices drifted from the room. A cold, commanding voice echoed through the metal walls. "I'll ask you one last time. Where is the key?" My heart stopped. It was Travis's voice that replied, ragged and weak. "I told you. I don't know." The sound of flesh hitting flesh echoed loudly. A brutal punch. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. Mike grabbed my shoulder, squeezing hard, signaling me to stay perfectly still. We slinked up to the edge of the office window. The blinds were drawn, but there was a half-inch gap. I peered through. There were 4 men in the room. 2 armed guards by the door. 1 man in a tailored suit, leaning against a desk. And in the center of the room, strapped to a steel chair, was Travis. His face was a bloody, swollen mess. His shirt was torn and stained crimson. A wave of nausea and rage washed over me. The man in the suit stood up. "I know you're trained to resist, artisan," he said smoothly, "but you also know we have infinite patience." Travis lifted his heavy head, blood dripping from his chin. "You're never going to find it," the suit smiled. "Oh, we will." He leaned down, inches from Travis's face. "It's just a matter of time." Mike pulled me back into the shadows. "We need a diversion." I looked at him desperately. "What are we waiting for?" "There are 4 of them, Lauren. If we kick the door in, we die." "But they're torturing him." Mike took a deep breath, his brain racing. "I have a play." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a brick-like device with an antenna. EMP jammer. It'll trip the localized circuit breakers and plunge this entire grid into darkness for a few minutes. I looked at him. "When the lights go out, we move?" Mike nodded, pulling a heavy maglite flashlight from his belt and handing it to me. "We go in hard and fast." I gripped the metal flashlight like a club. There was no time left for fear. Mike flipped the switch on the jammer. A sharp snap echoed from a nearby electrical box. Instantly, the warehouse went pitch black. The office light vanished. Complete, crushing darkness. Inside the office, someone yelled, "What the hell? Where'd the power go?" Walkie-talkies crackled with static. "Check the breakers!" "Now," Mike hissed. We rushed the door. Mike didn't bother with the handle. He hit the door with a running shoulder barge. Crash! The door flew open. Chaos erupted in the pitch-black room. The guards were shouting, fumbling for their flashlights. The man in the suit yelled, "Secure the perimeter!" Mike didn't hesitate. He hurled a strobe-flashing tactical light right at the nearest guard's face. The blinding pulse disoriented the man, making him stumble backward. Mike lunged, driving his elbow into the guard's throat. The man crumpled. The second guard unholstered his sidearm, but the darkness destroyed his aim. Mike kicked out blindly, sweeping the man's legs. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs. I didn't care about the guards. I sprinted straight toward where Travis was tied. My hands found the cold steel of the chair, then his shoulders. "Travis," I choked out, my voice trembling. He groaned. "Lauren? You shouldn't be here." I pulled a pocket knife from my jacket and frantically sawed at the zip ties on his wrists. "I wasn't going to leave you." Behind me, the fight was brutal. Fists hitting bone in the dark. The man in the suit suddenly barked, "Hold them!" I heard the terrifying shuck-shuck of a pistol slide racking. My heart froze. Suddenly, Mike grabbed the downed guard by the vest and hurled him directly into the suit. The gun fired bang, the muzzle flash illuminating the room in a strobe of yellow fire. The bullet shattered the plaster wall inches from my head. The zip tie snapped. Travis was free. He staggered to his feet, almost collapsing. I wrapped his arm around my shoulder, bearing his weight. "Can you walk?" "I'll manage," he gritted out. "Let's move!" Mike yelled, snatching the dropped pistol from the floor. We bolted out of the office and into the cavernous, pitch-black warehouse. Flashlight beams began slicing through the dark at the far end of the building. The guards outside had heard the gunshot. "Over there!" A voice bellowed. A bullet ricocheted off a steel beam right next to us, throwing sparks. I flinched, but Mike shoved us forward. "Keep running!" We navigated the maze of shelving by memory, rushing blindly toward the utility door. Travis was breathing heavily, stumbling, but adrenaline kept him moving. 2 more shots rang out. One blew a chunk of wood off a crate right beside me. We hit the steel personnel door. Mike slammed it open, and we spilled out into the freezing night air. "The car! Go!" Mike pointed. Behind us, the warehouse doors burst open. 2K operatives sprinted out into the grass, raising their weapons. We ran like our lives depended on it. Because they did. Travis was practically dragging his feet, and I was pulling him with everything I had. We reached the SUV. Mike threw open the back door. I shoved Travis inside and dove in after him. Mike vaulted into the driver's seat, hit the ignition, and stomped the accelerator. The electric motor whined. The tires spun on the wet grass, then caught the asphalt. As we tore down the access road, a final gunshot rang out, the bullet spiderwebbing the rear windshield. Mike didn't let up. We blasted onto I-5, merging violently into the late-night traffic, leaving the warehouse in the rearview mirror. We had escaped. In the back seat, Travis slumped against the leather, gasping for air. I turned to him, wiping blood from his cheek. "Are you okay?" He managed a weak, bloody smile. Mike kept his eyes glued to the mirrors. "Did they get the location of the key out of you?" Travis shook his head. "No," he looked at me. "Lauren, did you get the USB?" I patted my pocket. "I have it. We decrypted a fraction of it," Mike said from the front. "Just the GPS." Travis closed his eyes, his breathing ragged. "Then they won't stop hunting us. Is the data really that apocalyptic?" I asked. Travis opened his eyes, staring at the roof of the car. "If K2K recovers Damocles, They can monopolize the underground financial grids of half the G20 nations. Mike let out a low whistle. So, it's a nuclear bomb made of code. Travis turned his bruised face toward me. Lauren, you need to walk away. Absolutely not, I said instantly. Travis stared at me. We've gone way too far to turn back now, I said, my voice steady. Mike chuckled dryly from the driver's seat. She's a lot more stubborn than you think, man. Travis sighed, a mix of exhaustion and relief. Then we need an endgame. What kind of endgame? I asked. Travis looked out the shattered rear window at the neon glow of the Seattle skyline. We have to open source Damocles. Publish the data. Mike slammed on the brakes slightly in shock. Publish it? Travis nodded. It's the only way to neutralize K2K. If the world has it, the weapon becomes useless, and they won't have a reason to kill us. I understood instantly. If the secret was exposed, K2K would be fighting off the FBI, the SEC, and international intelligence. They wouldn't have the resources to hunt us, but doing so meant declaring open war on a multi-billion-dollar shadow corporation. The SUV sped through the glowing arteries of the city. Behind us, the Sodo warehouse was miles away, but I knew the real war was just beginning. Mike's SUV tore through the illuminated streets of Seattle. The city at night was vibrant, as always, cars snaking along the wet asphalt, a ceaseless river of red and white lights. But inside our vehicle, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Travis sat in the back, leaning heavily against the window. His face was a canvas of bruises and cuts, but his eyes were sharper now. I reached over and grabbed his hand. Are you sure about this? Travis knew exactly what I was asking. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. It's the only way out. Mike kept his eyes locked on the road ahead. If we dump this data, K2K becomes public enemy number 1 globally. Exactly, Travis rasped. But before we can dump it, we have to break the master encryption, I pointed out. What about the final layer? Mike nodded in the rearview mirror. It's a biometric, cryptographic hybrid. Only Travis has the cipher. Travis looked at Mike. Do you have an offline rig? Completely air-gapped? Mike smirked tightly. My house is built for this. The SUV turned off the arterial roads and slipped back into the quiet U-District cul-de-sac. Mike killed the headlights before pulling into his driveway. Travis looked out the window, scanning the shadows. We can't stay here long. Why? Mike asked, throwing the car into park. 2K's SIGINT capabilities are military grade. They'll ping the cell towers, run traffic cams. They'll realize I'm gone and start hunting the grid. A chill ran down my spine. Mike unbuckled his seatbelt. Then we work fast. We rushed inside. Mike instantly threw the deadbolts, dropped heavy blackout curtains over every window, and powered up his server rack. Travis, the terminal is yours, Mike said, pointing to the air-gapped laptop. Travis sat down, wincing as his bruised ribs shifted. He plugged the USB into the port. A chaotic wall of encrypted code flooded the screen. He began typing, his fingers flying across the keys despite his injuries. Damocles isn't just a database, Travis explained as he worked. It's an active financial routing override. It interfaces with the dark fiber networks connecting major banks, hedge funds, and sovereign treasuries. And how does it control them? Mike asked, leaning over Travis's shoulder. It injects phantom liquidity, Travis said. Whoever holds the master key can spoof trillions of dollars, artificially inflate markets, or trigger algorithmic flash crashes. I felt sick to my stomach. You mean, with one keystroke, Travis said, they could wipe out the U.S. retirement system, or bankrupt a nation. Mike let out a sharp breath. No wonder K2K wants to bury us. The scrolling code on the monitor suddenly halted. A prompt appeared. Travis typed a 6-4 character string from memory and hit enter. A new window materialized. Mike leaned in close. Holy shit! We're in. The screen populated with thousands of files. architectural diagrams of the code, lists of compromised financial institutions, and ledgers of illegal dark pool transactions K2K had already executed to build their empire. Mike's eyes darted across the data. My God. Lauren, if this is authentic, K2K has been rigging the global economy for a decade. Travis nodded grimly. That's why I stole the physical fail-safe key. To cripple the system. Where do we send it? Mike asked, sliding into his primary chair. Major outlets, Travis ordered without hesitation. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, WikiLeaks, the FBI Cyber Division, and the SEC. Mike's fingers danced across his keyboard. I have to route it through a Tor onion network and bounce the IP across a dozen proxies so they can't trace the upload. I stared at the screen as Mike compiled the files into a massive zip archive. Every second felt like an hour. Travis suddenly turned to me. Lauren. I looked down at him. I'm sorry, he whispered. I shook my head. Don't say that. He looked at the floor. I dragged you into a war zone. I squeezed his shoulder. You didn't drag me. I walked in myself. Travis looked up, the tension in his eyes softening just a fraction. Upload initialized, Mike announced. He hit a final key. A progress bar appeared on the screen. 500, 500 500. The room was dead silent, save for the whirring of the server cooling fans. Suddenly, Mike shot up in his chair. Damn it! I jumped. What? Mike pointed to a secondary monitor displaying network traffic. Someone is probing my firewall. Aggressively, Travis stood up, his jaw tight. It's K. 2K. Mike's fingers flew. They found us. 500. If they sever the connection before the payload hits the servers, it's over. Mike yelled, typing frantically to reroute the bandwidth. I looked at Travis. We have to hold the connection. Mike glanced at the reinforced front door. They might be coming physically. 500. My heart hammered against my ribs like a caged bird. From the street outside, the distinct, low rumble of heavy SUV engines approached, then stopped abruptly in front of the house. Mike cursed loudly. They're here. 500. Travis looked at me. His meaning was clear. If they breached the door before the upload finished, we were dead, and the secret died with us. 500. Just a few more seconds! Mike screamed at the monitor. Heavy combat-booted footsteps pounded up the front porch. Bam! A massive kinetic ram hit the front door. The hinges screamed. 500. Mike gripped the edge of his desk. Come on! Come on! Bam! The door frame splintered. Wood cracked like a gunshot. 500. The screen flashed green. Upload completed. Data distributed. Mike slumped back in his chair, exhaling a massive breath. It's out. At that exact millisecond, the reinforced front door blew open. 4 men in tactical gear swarmed into the living room, assault rifles raised. Travis looked at the leader, a calm, defiant smile crossing his bloody face. You're too late, Mike looked at me. Lauren, the world just found out. Outside, echoing down the quiet streets of the U District, the wail of police sirens began to rise in the distance. The data packets had triggered automated federal alerts. The news was spreading. The city was waking up to it. The world was waking up to it. K2K's game was over. Just as the tactical team breached Mike's front door, the shrieking wail of Seattle PD sirens tore through the neighborhood. The deafening sound shattered the suffocating tension in the room. Flashing red and blue lights bounced off the walls, casting frantic strobe effects across the faces of the K2K operatives. The point man froze, his rifle half raised. He glanced over his shoulder toward the street, instantly realizing the catastrophic shift in the dynamic. Fall back, he barked. But it was too late. From both ends of the cul-de-sac, SPD cruisers and unmarked FBI Suburbans had sealed the block. A police megaphone cut through the night air, commanding everyone inside the house to drop their weapons and come out with their hands up. The room fell into a terrifying, paralyzed silence. The operative glared at us, his eyes burning with pure malice. But he knew the truth. A few minutes ago, they were apex predators. Now, they were cornered prey. Travis stood next to me, his posture completely relaxed. Despite his battered face, the slight smile on his lips told me that the nightmare was finally over. Mike raised his hands slowly. "We're unarmed." The K2K men began to back away. A couple of them bolted for the back door, only to be met by the shouts of SWAT officers securing the perimeter. "Hold it right there!" A single warning shot cracked into the night sky. Within minutes, it was over. The operatives were disarmed and thrown onto the lawn in zip ties. Heavily armed police flooded Mike's house, clearing every room. A senior detective walked into the living room, holstering his weapon. "Are you three all right?" Travis nodded. "We're fine." I looked out the shattered front door. The sky in the east was beginning to turn a pale, bruised purple. Dawn was breaking. After a night that felt like a localized eternity, the sun was finally coming up. Mike collapsed onto his sofa, letting out a long, exhausted groan. Well, that's done. I looked at the computer monitors. The Damocles data had propagated. International news syndicates, Wall Street regulators, and federal cybercrime units possessed the entire cache. Within hours, the globe would be reeling from the exposé. Travis walked over to the window, watching the sunrise. "Everything changes today." I walked up and stood beside him. "Do you have any regrets?" Travis was silent for a moment. Then he shook his head. "No." He turned to look at me. "My only regret is putting you through hell." I offered a small smile. "If you hadn't, I never would have known how strong I actually am." Travis let out a quiet laugh. From the couch, Mike raised a hand. "I think I'm taking a month off after this. Maybe go to Hawaii." I looked back at him. "Just a month?" Mike shrugged. "Make it 2. For the first time in 48 hours, the crushing gravity in the room lifted. An hour later, we were escorted to the FBI field office downtown to give our statements. The debriefing was grueling, but the narrative was undeniable. K2K was exposed. The Damocles files triggered immediate federal raids on corporate offices across the country. The shadow financial empire they had built was brought into the blinding light of federal prosecution. An invincible monolith had been brought to its knees. 3 days later, Travis and I finally returned to our apartment in Pioneer Square. The living room still bore the scars of the home invasion. The coffee table was in pieces, the drywall was gouged, and the Navajo rug was ruined. But with the morning sun pouring through the tall windows, the devastation felt less like a tragedy and more like a closed chapter. Travis stood in the center of the room, looking at the mess. "I guess we need to do some remodeling." I laughed softly. "Just the apartment?" He shrugged, pulling me into a hug. "Maybe we remodel our whole life." I leaned into his chest. After everything that had happened, I realized a profound truth. There are crises that threaten to obliterate your world. But sometimes, it is only through surviving that obliteration that you truly understand the value of your life, the necessity of truth, and the depth of the people you love. Travis squeezed my hand. Outside the window, the city of Seattle was wide awake, buzzing with a new day. A new life was beginning. And this time, we were stepping into it, without fear. Through this story, we recognize that in life, truth and courage possess a power far greater than any shadowy syndicate or systemic corruption. Even when confronted with insurmountable danger, if individuals hold fast to their conscience, their integrity, and their love for one another, the light will ultimately conquer the dark. This narrative serves as a reminder that life will inevitably throw us into terrifying, unforeseen circumstances. Yet, it is precisely within those crucibles that we discover the true depths of our own resilience.
My new girlfriend and I just bought a place together, with your savings. She's everything you'll never be. The message glowed on my phone screen at 3 a.m. in my cramped barracks room in Bavaria. I stared at the photo attached. My husband Darren grinning like an idiot next to a blonde woman barely out of college, both holding a sold sign in front of a 2-story house I'd never seen before. My name is Valerie Morgan. and I'm a 35-year-old logistics officer in the United States Army, currently deployed at a base in Germany. For 6 months, I'd been coordinating supply chains and managing military operations, while my husband back in Austin, Texas, had been exploring his entrepreneurial freedom, which apparently meant exploring unemployment benefits and my bank account. I set my phone down carefully, my hands steadier than they had any right to be. Around me, the base was quiet, except for the distant hum of generators and the occasional footsteps of night patrol. I'd been sending money home every month, $2,000 religiously transferred to our joint account that we'd both agreed would help my parents retire and serve as our house down payment when I returned. "Wow, you're so smart," I typed back, my fingers moving with deliberate calm. The rage would come later. Right now, I felt something colder, more calculating. Darren had always been impulsive, but this crossed every line we'd drawn in our 8-year marriage. The woman in the photo, all fake tan and Instagram poses, looked young enough to be his daughter. Her name was probably something trendy. Everything about the situation screamed desperation and midlife crisis. I scrolled through the other photos he'd sent over the past week. Darren at restaurants I couldn't afford even on my officer's salary. Darren buying expensive wine. Darren and his girlfriend on shopping trips, her arms loaded with designer bags. Each image felt like a deliberate slap, designed to show me how much better his life had become without me. What he didn't know was that a month ago, I'd received a fraud alert from our bank. I'd been too busy with a major supply shipment to investigate properly, but now the pieces were falling into place. Something about unauthorized access attempts and signature verification issues. At the time, I'd assumed it was a system glitch. The photo of the house haunted me most. It wasn't just any house. It was the exact style we'd talked about buying together, complete with the wraparound porch I'd dreamed of since childhood. He'd taken our shared vision and twisted it into his betrayal. I reached for my secure phone. It was time to make some calls. The next morning, I sat across from Captain Patricia Weber in the JAG legal office, a small room that smelled of burnt coffee and determination. Patricia was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, and had seen enough military spouse betrayals to fill a handbook. "Tell me everything," she said, sliding a legal pad across the desk. I handed her my phone, showing the photos and messages. My husband emptied our joint savings to buy a house with another woman. He's been unemployed for over a year, living off my deployment pay. Patricia's expression hardened as she scrolled through the evidence. "When did you last authorize any major transactions?" "Never. We agreed the money was for my parents' retirement and our future down payment." I pulled out bank statements I'd printed that morning. "I've been sending $2,000 monthly to our joint account. He was supposed to be paying bills and saving the rest." "How much are we talking about?" "Approximately $45,000 over the past 18 months. The number hit me fresh each time I said it. Nearly 2 years of careful saving, gone. Patricia made notes quickly. "You mentioned a fraud alert?" "About a month ago. Something about signature verification and unauthorized access attempts. I was coordinating a major supply operation and didn't have time to investigate." I felt stupid admitting it, but deployment schedules were brutal. "That's actually good news. It means the bank flagged suspicious activity." She picked up her phone. "I'm calling Sergeant First Class Rodriguez in financial crimes. He specializes in military spouse fraud cases." Within an hour, I was sitting with both Patricia and Rodriguez, a stocky man with kind eyes who'd clearly seen too many soldiers betrayed by the people they trusted most. "Mrs. Morgan, this happens more than you'd think," Rodriguez said. "Deployed service members are particularly vulnerable. The distance, the time zones, the trust we place in our families, it creates perfect conditions for financial abuse." He opened a thick folder. "The good news is you have strong legal protections. The Service Members Civil Relief Act, military banking regulations, and if he forged your signature, which seems likely, We're looking at federal wire fraud. What's the process? First, we contact the bank to freeze all joint accounts. Then we trace every transaction. If he used forged documents or misrepresented your deployment status to bypass normal verification procedures, that's multiple felonies. Rodriguez's voice carried quiet satisfaction. Some people think military spouses are easy targets. They're about to learn otherwise. I felt something shift inside me, the first stirring of hope since seeing those photos. By that afternoon, I had a full financial investigation team working my case. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Clark, a forensic accountant with the military police, had pulled transaction records going back 2 years. The picture they painted was worse than I'd imagined. "He's been bleeding your account dry for months," Jennifer said, pointing to a printout covered in red marks. "Small amounts at first, 300 here, 500 there. Classic pattern of financial abuse. The victim doesn't notice until it's too late." I studied the highlighted withdrawals. Restaurant charges at places I'd never heard of. Online purchases for electronics, clothing, jewelry. Cash advances that happened almost weekly. I thought he was just struggling with unemployment. I kept sending more money because I felt guilty being away. "That's exactly what he was counting on," Rodriguez added. He'd returned with more documents, including copies of the house purchase paperwork. Here's where it gets interesting. To buy that house, he needed to show stable income and down payment funds. He did that by forging your signature on financial documents and claiming you were a willing co-purchaser. Patricia leaned forward. "Show her the loan application." Rodriguez spread out several pages. There, in handwriting that almost looked like mine, was my signature on mortgage documents. My supposed income was listed as my full military salary plus a fictional consulting business. My deployment was misrepresented as a temporary assignment, suggesting I'd be returning to Texas permanently within months. "He told them you were deployed, but actively participating in the purchase," Jennifer explained. "Made it seem like you were shopping for houses via video calls and had given him power of attorney for the closing." I felt physically sick. Power of attorney that doesn't exist. Correct. Which makes every document he signed a forgery and every representation he made fraud. Rodriguez's tone was grimly satisfied. "The girlfriend's involvement makes it worse. She signed documents claiming to know you personally and confirming your consent to the purchase. She's never met me." "Conspiracy to commit wire fraud," Patricia noted. They both knew the representations were false. Jennifer pulled out her laptop. "I've already contacted the title company and the bank. The Service Members Civil Relief Act gives us significant leverage here. When they find out a deployed service member's signature was forged and their protected funds were misused, everything stops." "What happens next?" "Tomorrow morning, investigators from the Office of Service Members Civil Relief will be waiting at the title company," Rodriguez said. "Darren and his girlfriend are scheduled to complete the final closing paperwork at 10 a.m. Texas time." I looked at the photo of the house again. My dream home bought with my betrayed trust. "Will I get the money back?" "Every penny," Patricia assured me. "Plus interest, penalties, and probably their legal fees when this is over." For the first time in days, I smiled. My husband thought he was so smart, but he'd just committed federal crimes with a paper trail that would make prosecutors' jobs easy. The next morning, I found myself pacing the communications room at 4 a.m., calculating time zones obsessively. It was 9 a.m. in Austin, 1 hour before Darren and Tiffany's scheduled closing. I'd barely slept, running through every possible scenario of what was about to unfold. My secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Rodriguez. "Assets frozen. Team in position. Will update hourly." Patricia found me there, clutching a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "You know you don't have to watch this unfold in real time," she said gently. "Yes, I do." I couldn't explain why, but I needed to be present for this moment, even from 4,000 miles away. He spent months planning this betrayal, sending me those photos to hurt me. I want to know the exact moment it all falls apart. She sat down beside me. Jennifer's team found more evidence overnight. Your husband's been living quite the lifestyle on your deployment pay. I looked up from my phone. What do you mean? Credit cards you didn't know about, opened in both your names using your social security number and forged signatures. He's been funding expensive dinners, weekend trips, even bought the girlfriend a car. Patricia handed me a thick folder. Total debt in your name, $78,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $78,000? I'd been careful with money my entire adult life, building credit slowly, saving religiously. How is that even legal? It's not. Identity theft, fraud, forgery. He's been busy. She pointed to specific charges. Look at the timeline. Most of these purchases happened right after you deployed, when he knew you'd be too busy to monitor accounts closely. I stared at charges for jewelry stores, luxury hotels, expensive restaurants, a $3,000 weekend at a resort in San Antonio, $5,000 at a high-end clothing boutique. While I was eating MREs and sleeping in a barracks, he was living like a millionaire. My phone buzzed again. Subjects arrived early, investigators in conference room adjacent to closing office. They're there, I told Patricia, my heart racing. She squeezed my shoulder. Whatever happens next, remember that you're not the victim here anymore. You're the one who caught them. At exactly 10:15 a.m. Texas time, my phone rang. It was Rodriguez, calling from Austin. Valerie, we got them. I put the call on speaker so Patricia could hear. What happened? They walked into the title company like they owned the world. Darren was actually bragging to the girlfriend about how easy it had been to access your money. Said military wives were too trusting and stupid to notice anything. My hands clenched into fists. He said that? In front of 2 investigators who recorded every word. Rodriguez sounded pleased. When the title company representative told them there was a problem with the signatures, Darren got belligerent. Started yelling about how his wife was deployed and couldn't be expected to come in person for every little detail. Then what? That's when Officer Janet Martinez from Service Member Civil Relief introduced herself. She explained that forging a deployed service member's signature on financial documents was a federal crime, and that all assets related to the transaction were being frozen pending investigation. I could picture Darren's face, the arrogance melting into panic. How did he react? Denied everything at first. Claimed you'd given him permission for all of it. Then the girlfriend started crying, saying she didn't know any of this was illegal. Rodriguez paused. But here's the best part. Martinez asked him to explain the power of attorney documentation, and he couldn't produce any legitimate paperwork. Because it doesn't exist. Exactly. That's when he realized how much trouble he was in. Rodriguez continued his account, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. The title company had to call their legal department immediately. Turns out, when they ran the verification checks this morning, which they should have done weeks ago, half the documents didn't match their security protocols. What kind of documents? Patricia asked, taking notes. Employment verification letters claiming Valerie worked for a consulting firm in Austin. Bank statements showing joint income that didn't exist. Even a letter supposedly from Valerie's commanding officer giving her permission to purchase property while deployed. Rodriguez's voice carried professional disgust. All forged, all easily disproven. I felt a mix of vindication and fury. How sophisticated were the forgeries? Amateur hour. Darren's not nearly as smart as he thinks. He used an old letterhead template he probably downloaded online, and the supposed commanding officer signature was just a Google image of a military signature. Any real verification would have caught it immediately. My phone buzzed with a text message, and my blood went cold. It was from Darren. What the hell did you do? They're saying I committed fraud. This is your fault for not being here. I showed the message to Patricia, who shook her head. Even when caught red-handed, he's still blaming you. That's going to look great in court. Rodriguez was still talking. The girlfriend's involvement runs deeper than we initially thought. Tiffany wasn't just a passive participant. She actively helped forge documents. We found text messages between them planning how to make the fake paperwork look legitimate. She was in on it from the beginning? According to the message thread we recovered, she's the one who suggested using your deployment status to their advantage. Said military wives were easy targets because they couldn't monitor things closely. His voice hardened. She also bragged to friends about spending your money, posting social media photos with captions like, "When your man knows how to provide." I remembered those photos. Tiffany in expensive restaurants, wearing jewelry I couldn't afford, living the life I should have been building for my future. Social media evidence? Screenshots of everything. She documented their entire fraud scheme thinking it made her look successful. Every expensive dinner, every shopping trip, every luxury purchase, all time-stamped and geotagged. Rodriguez sounded almost amused. Criminals who post their crimes online make our jobs much easier. Patricia was making rapid notes. What's the immediate fallout? All joint accounts frozen. The house sale is voided. The title company is facing their own legal issues for not properly verifying the documents. And both Darren and Tiffany are looking at federal charges. My phone buzzed again with another text from Darren. "You ruined everything. Tiffany's crying and it's all your fault. I loved you and this is how you repay me." I showed it to Patricia, who laughed darkly. "He loved you so much he stole your money and bought a house with another woman. That's definitely going in the evidence file." Rodriguez continued. "The U.S. Attorney's Office is very interested in this case. Military spouse fraud is a priority for them, especially when it involves forged documents and identity theft. They're looking at wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act." "What kind of penalties are we talking about?" "Wire fraud alone carries up to 20 years. Add the identity theft and military protection violations, and they're both looking at serious federal prison time." He paused. "Plus full restitution to you, including penalties and interest." I felt something I hadn't experienced since seeing those first photos. Genuine peace. "When will they be arrested?" "Already happened. They're both in federal custody as of 30 minutes ago." 3 hours later, I was back in the communications room when Jennifer Clark called with updates that made everything even more satisfying. "Valerie, you need to hear this. When we executed the search warrant on their apartment, we found evidence of a much bigger scheme," Jennifer said, her voice carrying barely contained excitement. I put her on speaker. "What kind of evidence?" "Darren's been doing this to other military spouses. We found files on 3 other women whose husbands are deployed, complete with forged documents and stolen financial information." She paused for effect. "He wasn't just betraying you. He was running a military spouse fraud operation." Patricia's eyebrows shot up. "Other victims?" "All logistics or supply officers like Valerie, all deployed to locations with challenging communication schedules. He specifically targeted women in positions where they'd be too busy to monitor accounts closely." Jennifer's tone turned grim. "Tiffany helped him research the targets through social media, identifying spouses with good credit and steady military income." I felt sick thinking about other women going through what I'd experienced. "How much money total?" "Preliminary estimate is over $200,000 across 4 victims, including you. But here's where it gets interesting. The girlfriend wasn't just his accomplice. She was the mastermind." That revelation hit me like a slap. Tiffany planned this? According to seized communications, she approached Darren after meeting him at a bar 6 months ago. She'd researched military spouse fraud techniques online and was looking for someone with access to deployed partners. Jennifer's voice carried professional disgust. She specifically targeted older, unemployed men married to successful military women. Patricia was furiously taking notes. "So this was premeditated identity theft operation?" "Gets better. Tiffany's real name is Tiffany Rodriguez. She's been using multiple identities to run romance scams for years. The Instagram fitness coach persona was completely fake, designed to attract men like Darren who were feeling insecure about their wives' success. I thought about those photos again, my husband grinning beside someone who'd manipulated him into destroying our marriage. Was any of their relationship real? Based on the evidence, she was planning to disappear once they'd stolen enough money to buy the house outright. The mortgage was just a temporary step. She intended to refinance or sell quickly, taking her share and moving on to the next target. My phone buzzed with yet another message from Darren. "They're saying Tiffany is a criminal who used me. You have to help me. I made a mistake, but I didn't know she was lying about everything." I showed the message to Patricia, who rolled her eyes. "Now he wants your help. Classic manipulation," Jennifer continued. "The best part is that their arrest was recorded by the title company's security cameras. Darren completely lost it when he realized the scope of the charges. Started screaming that Tiffany had lied to him about everything, that he thought you'd given permission for the house purchase." Did he really believe that? Hard to say. The messages we recovered suggest he knew it was wrong, but convinced himself he deserved your money because of your successful career. Jennifer's voice softened slightly. He also wrote several drafts of messages to you that he never sent. Apologies mixed with resentment about feeling like a failure compared to your military achievements. I felt an unexpected pang of sadness. Our marriage had problems, but I'd never imagined they'd lead to federal crime. What happens to the other victims? We're contacting them today. Thanks to your case, we can recover their money and prevent Tiffany from targeting anyone else. Jennifer paused. You probably saved several families from financial ruin. That thought gave me something I hadn't expected. Purpose beyond just personal justice. 2 weeks later, I received a call that made everything worth it. Rodriguez was calling from the federal courthouse in Austin, where Darren and Tiffany had just appeared for their arraignment. "Valerie, you should have seen it," he said, barely containing his amusement. Darren showed up thinking he could charm his way out of federal charges. Wore his best suit, brought character references, the whole performance. I was sitting in my barracks room, finally able to sleep normally again now that justice was moving forward. How did that work out for him? About as well as you'd expect. The federal prosecutor laid out the entire scheme, the forged documents, the identity theft, the conspiracy with Tiffany, the other victims. When they got to the part about him bragging to investigators about how easy it was to steal from military wives, his lawyer actually put his head in his hands. I couldn't help but smile. And Tiffany? Even better. Turns out she had warrants in 3 other states for similar fraud schemes. The Instagram fitness coach thing was just her latest identity. She's been running romance scams and military spouse fraud for over 2 years. Rodriguez's voice carried deep satisfaction. She tried to throw Darren under the bus, claiming she was also a victim of his manipulation. The judge wasn't buying it. What are the charges? Darren's looking at wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and violations of military protection laws. Tiffany gets all that plus additional counts for the other victims and her previous warrant history. He paused. The prosecutor is recommending 5 to 7 years for Darren, 8 to 12 for Tiffany. I felt a weight I'd been carrying for weeks finally lift. When's the trial? They're both plea bargaining now. Full restitution to all victims plus penalties and court costs. Justice was finally coming. A month later, I was video calling Patricia from my barracks when she delivered the news I'd been waiting for. Both plea deals are finalized, she said, grinning at the camera. Darren pled guilty to all charges in exchange for 4 years. Federal prison plus 5 years probation. Full restitution of $93,000 to you, including penalties and interest. I sat back in my desk chair, finally able to process that it was really over. And Tiffany? 7 years federal prison. No early release eligibility. She has to pay restitution to all victims across multiple states. Total amount is over $300,000. Patricia's expression grew serious. The judge specifically mentioned that military spouse fraud undermines national security by targeting service members' families. What about the house? Reverted back to the original owners since the sale was fraudulent. Your money is being recovered from the escrow account, and Darren's responsible for any costs the title company incurred. She shuffled papers on her desk. There's more good news. The other military spouses they targeted are getting full restitution too. One woman had her entire deployment savings stolen. $28,000. I thought about those other women, probably feeling the same betrayal and confusion I'd experienced. At least something good came from this mess. Darren sent a letter through his lawyer, Patricia said carefully. He wants to apologize and ask for your forgiveness when he gets out of prison. I laughed, surprising myself. He still thinks this is about him. He destroyed our marriage, stole my money, committed federal crimes, and hurt other military families. But he wants my forgiveness? What should I tell his lawyer? Tell him I'm too busy building my real future to waste time on his fantasy of redemption. I looked at my deployment countdown calendar, suddenly excited about returning home. I have 3 months left here, then I'm starting fresh. The revenge was complete, but my life was just beginning. As I closed the laptop and prepared for my evening patrol, I realized that the betrayal that had shattered my trust had also revealed my own strength. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing you'll ever do.